Her voice pierced through the sound of my son's headset, shrill and venomous. "Turn that racket off right now, or I'm calling the cops." I sprinted from the kitchen, heart hammering, only to see Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, standing inside my living room. She hadn't knocked. She hadn't been invited. She just barged in, phone already raised, live streaming my son's video game session to whoever would watch. Mason's friends were still on the other end, stunned. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a neighborly complaint anymore. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name is Daniel, and if you had told me a few years ago that I'd be standing in a homeowners association, meeting like it was a courtroom drama, defending my own family against a neighbor with a camera in her hand and malice in her eyes, I would have laughed. I'm not a fighter. I've never been the kind of guy who seeks out conflict. I'm a father, a husband, and a self-professed tech nerd. That's it. By day, I work in IT. I'm the guy people call when their email won't load, when their computer screen goes black, or when the Wi-Fi cuts out 5 minutes before a presentation. I know how to build a server from scratch, fix a fried motherboard, and string together a mess of wires until it looks like a clean circuit. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest. And it's taught me patience. The kind of patience that comes from waiting for a progress bar to hit 100%, or talking a frustrated coworker through turning something off and back on again. But outside of work, I'm a dad first. My wife, Emily, and I have an 11-year-old son named Mason. He's our world. He's funny, kind-hearted, and a little bit shy around new people. But get him in front of his Xbox with his best friend on the other end of a headset, and suddenly he's fearless. He laughs louder than anyone, shouts his strategies into the mic, and sometimes forgets we can hear every word from the kitchen. I love it. In a world where kids are always on their phones, it warms my heart to hear him so engaged, so alive, and so happy. That joy matters to me more than I can explain. When I was a kid, my family never had much. We bounced between apartments, always one step away from eviction. I promised myself that if I ever had a family of my own, I'd give them a real home. Not just a roof and 4 walls, but a place where they felt safe to laugh, play, and grow. That's why we stretched ourselves to buy this little house in this neighborhood, with its tree-lined streets and promises of community. At first, it felt like we'd made it. The neighbors waved, the lawns were tidy. Mason had a cul-de-sac where he could ride his bike until sunset. But then came Karen. Everyone knew her. She wasn't just on the HOA board, she was the HOA board. She walked the neighborhood with a clipboard like it was a royal scepter, pointing out trash cans that weren't tucked in tightly enough, or flower beds that didn't meet her aesthetic standards. People would literally cross the street to avoid her. She had that energy, like a storm cloud that follows you even on a sunny day. At first, I tried to stay on her good side, smile, wave, agree when she made a passive-aggressive comment about someone else's lawn ornaments. I thought if I stayed polite, she'd leave us alone, but I underestimated her. Karen wasn't just nosy, she had a need to control, and when she realized she couldn't control us, that my son would still laugh with his friends, that our basketball would occasionally roll onto the sidewalk, that we weren't living every second of our lives under her rulebook, we became her new project. I'm not the kind of guy who backs down when my family is threatened. Maybe it comes from growing up watching my mom work 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. Maybe it's from working in tech, where every day you're fighting invisible battles with problems no one else can see. Whatever the reason, something inside me refuses to let anyone bully my family. That's why, when Karen stormed into my house that night and interrupted Mason's live stream, I didn't just see a nosy neighbor anymore. I saw someone who had crossed a line, someone who thought her position on the HOA gave her the right to trample over my family's safety and dignity. And as much as I hate conflict, I knew this was a fight I couldn't walk away from. Not just for me, but for my son, for the home we'd worked so hard to build. Because if I let her get away with this, what was next? That was the moment I decided, no more fear, no more tiptoeing around her, no more letting Karen dictate the rules of our lives. I didn't know it at the time, but my son's gaming livestream had captured everything. Her barging in, her screaming, the wild accusations. That video would become the turning point. But before we get there, I need you to understand. Karen didn't just appear in my living room one night out of nowhere. This wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of weeks, months, of her poking, prodding, and pushing boundaries. She wanted control, and when we wouldn't give it to her, she decided to take it by force. That's why I fight. Because when you're up against someone like Karen, you either stand your ground or you lose everything. When I tell people that our HOA president barged into my son's gaming session, some assume it was just one bad day, a single outburst from a stressed out neighbor. But the truth is, that night was just the culmination of weeks of her testing our boundaries. By the time she crossed the line into our home, Karen had already been weaving a pattern of control, a slow, steady tightening of the leash she wanted wrapped around every family in the neighborhood. It started with the mailbox. Mason and I had just painted it together, a Saturday project after I came home from a long week at work. He picked the color, a deep navy blue, because in his words, it looked like the night sky before the stars come out. We taped off the edges, painted carefully, and when it was done, he stood back, proud of what he'd accomplished with his dad. That pride lasted about 3 days before a crisp white envelope appeared wedged in the box flap. Inside, a notice written in stiff legal language accused us of violating community color guidelines for exterior structures. At the bottom was Karen's signature in a bold flourish, and in parentheses, her handwritten note, "We all must maintain standards. Beige or white, only I didn't even know we had rules about mailbox colors." But when I looked at the HOA handbook, a 50-page monstrosity that read like it was written by a lawyer with a grudge, there it was, in fine print. Exterior mail receptacles must remain within approved color palette, beige, off-white, taupe. Mason was crushed. He asked, "So, we have to paint over it?" I told him we'd talk about it, but inside I was furious. Who barges into a family's little project like that? Who can't let an 11-year-old enjoy a mailbox he painted himself? I brushed it off as just Karen being Karen, but it didn't stop there. A week later, she left another notice taped to our door. This time, it was because Mason had left his basketball hoop near the driveway overnight. "Violation of community standards," she wrote. "Basketball equipment must be stored out of sight when not in immediate use." She even took a picture of the hoop leaning against the garage, as though it was evidence of some crime. Emily tried to laugh it off. "At least she's consistent," she said, rolling her eyes. But I could see the way she was starting to tense whenever she saw Karen's white SUV crawl down our street. It wasn't just us either. Mrs. Delgado across the street got fined because her Halloween pumpkin stayed out until November 2nd. The Millers, a young couple who just had a baby, got a written warning because their lawn wasn't mowed for a week. Meanwhile, Karen's best friend, who lived 2 doors down from us, had a yard that looked like a junkyard, with rusted bikes, a broken trampoline, and weeds waist-high. Not a single violation letter ever touched their door. It became obvious. Karen didn't care about the rules. She cared about power. She had a way of smiling when she handed you a citation, like she enjoyed it. She'd tell neighbors, "It's for the good of the community. You want to keep your property values up, don't you?" But if you didn't comply quickly, she'd escalate. Rumor was she once threatened to have someone's car towed because they parked in the street for more than 2 nights in a row. Another neighbor told me she'd seen Karen walking around after dark with a flashlight, peering into yards to check if anyone's trash can lids were left open. I started to notice her eyes on our house more and more. If I forgot to roll the trash can in before work, I could count on seeing her on her phone across the street, pretending to be checking her mailbox. Mason said she even walked into our backyard once when he was out there with his friends. "She told us we were too loud," he whispered, his face pale. That night, he didn't want to play Xbox at all. That's when I began to feel it, that creeping sense of danger. Not the kind where you worry about burglars or a storm, but the kind where you know someone is obsessed with you, someone who has authority and will twist it in ways you can't predict. I started documenting everything. Every note she left, I scanned and saved. Every time she walked by our house with her phone, I logged it. I installed a door camera, not just for deliveries, but because I had this gnawing feeling I might need proof one day. But even then, part of me thought maybe it was paranoia. Maybe Karen was just an eccentric old neighbor, too wrapped up in her HOA binder to realize how intrusive she was being. That illusion shattered the night she stepped inside our home, uninvited, while my son's livestream was broadcasting to hundreds of strangers. That night, the world saw the real Karen, and that livestream, the very thing she hated most, became our only lifeline. It happened on a Tuesday night. I had just gotten home from work, the kind of day where the fluorescent lights felt like they were burning into my skull. Emily had dinner warming in the oven. Mason was in the living room with his headset on, laughing into the mic. He'd finally convinced his cousin from out of state to join him online for a marathon gaming session. For a kid who didn't always fit in at school, those hours online were his sanctuary. I was rinsing dishes when I heard the first bang. It wasn't the soft knock of a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. It was the kind of pounding that makes you think someone's kicking the door. Mason froze mid-sentence, his voice trailing off into silence. He looked back at me, his eyes wide, as if to ask, "Dad?" Before I could even set down the plate, the front door swung open. No key, no waiting. Just a sudden slam of wood against drywall. And there she was. Karen. Her short blonde bob was perfectly in place. Her phone raised like a badge, recording. "I warned you!" she screeched, her voice cutting through the house like broken glass. "This is a violation of HOA rules. Quiet hours start at 8 p.m., and your son has been yelling for hours." Mason ripped off his headset, his cheeks flushed. "Dad, I wasn't even being that loud," he whispered. He looked so small on the couch, controller still in his hands, the chat box on his screen exploding with messages from his friends. "Who is that lady?" "Bro, is that your mom?" "Call the cops!" I felt my stomach twist into knots. My first instinct was to protect him, to shield him from the venom dripping off her words. "Karen, you can't just come into my house," I snapped, stepping between her and my son. She narrowed her eyes at me, lips curling into that smug little smile she always wore. "I'm the HOA president," she said, as if that gave her the right to barge into people's homes. "When someone is disturbing the peace, I have to take action. If you won't control your kid, I will." I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. "Get out! Now!" Her phone was still recording, her voice sharp, rehearsed. "This will be going to the board. And if I hear one more scream from this house, I'll be calling the police. We will fine you. We will remove you if we have to." Mason's eyes brimmed with tears. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. Emily appeared in the hallway, clutching a dish towel, her face pale with shock. She didn't even say anything at first, just stared at Karen in disbelief, as though she couldn't process that this woman had crossed our threshold uninvited. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice trembling. "Karen, you can't just come in here. This is our home. You're trespassing." Karen scoffed, lowered her phone for just a moment, and leaned in close to me. I could smell the sharp tang of her perfume. "You don't understand," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "I run this neighborhood. If you don't like it, maybe this isn't the place for you." She turned on her heel, slammed the door behind her, and left us standing there in stunned silence. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the Xbox still running. Then I heard Mason sniffle. He was staring at the darkened screen. His friends had logged off the second Karen barged in, probably scared by the screaming. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "Did I do something wrong?" That broke me. My son, my smart, funny, gentle boy, was sitting there, questioning himself because an adult had stormed into his home and humiliated him in front of his friends. I knelt down, put my hands on his shoulders, and looked him in the eye. "No, buddy, you didn't do anything wrong. She did." But the truth was, I was shaken too. Because if Karen was bold enough to enter my home over something as small as a video game, what was next? Would she show up when Emily was home alone? Would she try to call the authorities on us just to make a point? The thought of my family being treated like criminals for something so petty made my chest tighten with rage. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like someone at the door. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the front door like a guard dog, my phone in hand just in case. My mind kept replaying the moment Karen shoved her way in, the way she smiled like she owned us. The next morning, Mason didn't want to put on his headset. He told me, "What if she comes back? What if she calls the cops and they think I'm doing something bad? No 11-year-old should have to worry about things like that. He should be worried about his math homework or which character to pick in his game, not whether his neighbor is going to ruin his life. That's when I decided this wasn't just Karen being Karen. This was the first strike in a battle I hadn't wanted but now couldn't avoid. And the cruelest irony? She thought barging into my house while my son was live streaming his game would make us look bad. But what she didn't realize was that the internet had already seen her in all her glory. Mason's friends had clipped the whole thing. The recording was out there, and it was about to become the weapon we needed. The fear in my chest started to harden into something else. Resolve. She wanted a fight? She had no idea who she was dealing with. The night Karen barged into my son's live stream felt like the storm before the hurricane. I thought the worst was behind us, but I was wrong. That was only her opening move. What came next was the kind of escalation that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your neighbors. It was a Friday evening, just after 9 p.m. Mason was back in his gaming chair, hesitant, still shaken from Karen's last intrusion, but trying to push past it. His friends had encouraged him to stream again, saying they had his back. Emily and I tried to make it feel normal, like any other night. We laughed too loudly at a TV show in the next room, pretending everything was fine. But in the back of my mind, I was waiting for her. And sure enough, the pounding started again. B-A-M, B-A-M, B-A-M. This time, though, it wasn't the front door. It was the back gate, the one that led to our yard. Mason flinched. Emily looked at me, eyes wide, as the sound echoed through the kitchen. "Stay here," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my stomach had dropped. I grabbed my phone, and for the first time, I was grateful I'd installed those cameras. I pulled up the feed and froze. Karen wasn't alone. 2 men stood with her, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing black leather jackets with some kind of biker emblem stitched on the back. They weren't neighbors. I'd never seen them before. One of them was tapping a bat against his leg. "Open up!" Karen's voice rang out over the yard. "We need to inspect your property. You can't just ignore the HOA. You signed the agreement when you moved in." I could feel Mason's eyes on me, his voice trembling. "Dad, is she serious? Why are there guys with her?" I forced a steady breath. "She can't come in. She doesn't have the right. Lock the doors." But before I could move, Karen yanked the gate again and marched across the lawn with the 2 bikers flanking her. The motion sensor light flicked on, catching her, face in a harsh white glow. She looked like some kind of self-appointed sheriff leading her deputies into battle. I locked the back door just as her hand hit the handle. She sneered at me through the glass. "If you don't let us in, I'm calling the cops. I'll tell them your son is disturbing the neighborhood. We've all heard him screaming in here. Who knows what you're doing to him?" That word, screaming, cut deeper than she realized. She was implying I was hurting my son. Mason stepped back, tears already streaking down his face. "Dad, no, I swear I was just playing," he whimpered. "I know, buddy," I whispered, crouching down to hug him. My hands shook with anger. I wanted to throw open the door and tell her off, but I knew better. I glanced at the TV. Mason had left the stream running again. The little chat window scrolled non-stop. His friends and strangers alike were watching everything unfold. Karen raised her phone higher. "I've got this all on camera. The board will hear about how you terrorized the neighborhood with your screaming child." That was it. That was the breaking point. Not the letters, not the glares, not even the trespassing. It was this moment where she twisted my son's laughter into something ugly, something criminal. I picked up my own phone and quietly whispered into it, "Record." The door camera's red light blinked on. The live stream kept running. Every second she stood there, spewing venom, she was digging her own grave. Emily found her voice then. She pulled Mason behind her and said firmly, "Karen, leave. Right now. You are trespassing, and you brought strangers into our yard at night. We're calling the police." That was when Karen snapped. "Go ahead," she barked, gesturing to her biker entourage. "Call them. I'll tell them everything I've seen. The noise, the neglect, the way that poor child is left screaming for hours. Let's see who they believe, the HOA president or you." She thought her title gave her untouchable power. She didn't realize her voice was being broadcast to a live audience. Dozens of screenshots being taken, recordings being saved. Mason's friend had already clipped the stream and posted it. I dialed 911 anyway. My hands were slick with sweat as I explained that my neighbor had trespassed into my property with 2 men, threatening my family. The operator told me to stay inside, to keep the doors locked, that officers were on their way. Karen must have overheard, because she started yelling even louder. "Good! Call them! I'll tell them you're abusing your son. I've got proof." She shook her phone at me, the red recording light still blinking. Mason let out a sob and buried his face in Emily's side. I rubbed his back, but my chest ached watching his safe space, his room, his games, his laughter, turn into a weapon against him. This was more than harassment now. This was character assassination. The minutes stretched like hours. The bikers loomed on our back porch, one of them gripping the bat so tight his knuckles went white. Karen paced, muttering under her breath, occasionally raising her voice to call me a terrible father or neighborhood nuisance. Finally, red and blue lights flashed across our driveway. The cruisers pulled up, and for a second, I thought we were saved. But the way Karen's face twisted into a smile told me I was wrong. She ran toward the officers, phone still recording. "There he is!" she cried. "He's abusive, he's violent, and he's been terrorizing us all night." And in that moment, standing in my kitchen with my wife, clutching our son, I realized just how far she was willing to go. She wasn't just enforcing rules anymore. She was trying to destroy us. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that her entire meltdown was already out there, live on Mason's gaming channel, hundreds of viewers, dozens of witnesses, evidence she couldn't erase, and that evidence was about to become the one thing that saved us from her lies. When the police arrived that night, I thought we were about to be saved. But if you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA president, you know nothing is that simple. 2 officers stepped onto my lawn, their flashlights cutting through the dark. Karen was already mid-performance, waving her phone around like she was reporting breaking news. "There!" she shouted. "That man is abusive. He's screaming at his son every night. We can hear it across the neighborhood. You have to do something before something terrible happens." One of the officers, a younger guy, maybe mid-30s, looked uncomfortable. The other, older and broader, shot me a hard glance. "Sir," he said, "we got a noise complaint. Can we come inside and check things out?" Before I could answer, Mason spoke up, voice shaking. "It's me. I was just playing Fortnite. I wasn't being hurt." He was still pale, his little hands gripping Emily's arm. That moment should have been enough, but Karen wouldn't let up. "Of course he's going to say that, officer. Look at him. He's terrified. He doesn't want to upset his father. I've been documenting this for weeks. I could feel my blood boiling. But instead of yelling, I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. Mason's live stream was still rolling. Comments poured in. "We saw everything. She just walked in. This is crazy." Hundreds of usernames, hundreds of witnesses. I turned the screen toward the officers. "You want to see what really happened?" I said, my voice low and steady. "Because the entire internet already has." The younger officer leaned in. He watched as the video replayed Karen's entrance, the door slamming open, her shrill accusations, the biker thugs hovering behind her like hired muscle. He glanced back at Karen, then at Mason, who was wiping his tears on his sleeve. The older officer shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "did you go into their house without permission?" Karen froze. I had to. I was protecting the neighborhood." "From an 11-year-old playing video games?" I asked, louder now. "From a kid laughing with his friends online?" For the first time since we'd moved in, Karen didn't have a ready comeback. Her face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The bikers looked at each other, clearly unsure what they'd signed up for. The officers pulled me aside. "Sir, do you want to press trespassing charges?" The question hung in the night air. Part of me wanted to scream, "Yes!" immediately. But I knew Karen was cunning. She'd weasel her way out of it, spin the story, maybe even double down. If I wanted to stop her once and for all, I needed more than a single incident. I needed a pattern. I needed undeniable proof. So I told the officers, "Not tonight. but I do want a report filed. I want it on record." They nodded, took our statements, and eventually escorted Karen and her 2 biker friends off our property. But she didn't go quietly. As she walked away, she turned and hissed, "This isn't over." That night, after Mason finally cried himself to sleep, I sat alone in front of the computer. His Livestream replay was still up, the comments section filled with disbelief and outrage. I scrolled through them, screenshotting everything. Some viewers had clipped the video and uploaded it to their own channels. In a matter of hours, Karen's little performance had been seen by thousands. That was my first piece of evidence. The next morning, I printed out every notice she'd ever left us. The mailbox violation, the basketball hoop, even a warning about a suspicious noise that turned out to be Mason's laughter. I highlighted the dates, lined them up in order. When I spread the papers across the dining table, a pattern emerged. She wasn't enforcing rules across the board. She was targeting families with kids while turning a blind eye to her friends. But I needed more than my word and a few letters. I needed corroboration. So I started knocking on doors. At first, the neighbors were hesitant. Nobody wanted to cross Karen. She'd fine Mr. Peterson for having his garbage can out a day early, and he still looked like he was nursing the wound. Mrs. Delgado shook her head, whispering, "She'll make your life miserable if you push her." But then something shifted. Maybe it was the viral clip of her storming into my house. Maybe it was seeing Mason's tear-streaked face in that video. Whatever it was, people began to talk. She told me my daughter's chalk drawings were graffiti. One mom confided. "She called animal control on my dog because he barked at the mailman," said another neighbor. "She fines me for weeds, but her friend down the street hasn't cut his grass in months." It was all falling into place. Karen wasn't a stickler for rules. She was selectively enforcing them, using the HOA like her personal weapon. I gathered everything, screenshots, video clips, neighbors' written statements. I even matched the timestamps from Mason's livestream to the 911 call logs. At 9:07 p.m., Karen claimed there was a domestic disturbance. At 9:09, Mason's stream showed her busting through our door, shouting accusations while my son played a game. The contrast was damning. By the time I finished organizing the evidence into a neat folder, the fear I'd felt earlier had been replaced with something sharper: determination. Karen had power because people were afraid of her. She counted on silence, on people not pushing back. But the live stream had changed everything. For the first time, the neighborhood had seen her with their own eyes. They'd heard her voice tremble with anger, not concern. They'd watched 2 strange men lurking in my backyard while my kid sat terrified in his chair. The cracks in her armor were showing, and I was going to pry them wide open. I called one of the board members, Mrs. Caldwell, a quiet woman in her 60s who had lived in the neighborhood since before Karen moved in. She picked up on the second ring, her voice hushed. "Daniel," she whispered, "I saw the video. So did my daughter. I can't believe she actually went into your house. She threatened to call the cops on me," I said. "She accused me of hurting Mason. If it wasn't for that video, who knows what would have happened when the police showed up." There was a pause. Then she sighed. "You're not the first, you know. But you might be the first with proof. The board's been afraid of her for years, but maybe now we can do something." I looked down at the folder on my desk, the evidence piled neatly together. For the first time in months, I felt like we had a fighting chance. Karen wanted a war. Well, wars are won with strategy, not just strength. The investigation had officially begun, and I wasn't going to stop until Karen's mask finally slipped in front of everyone. The community center smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet, the kind of scent that lingers from too many meetings that dragged on longer than they should have. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor as neighbors filled the room, whispering in clusters. Some looked tired, others curious, but a few, especially Karen's inner circle, had their arms folded, ready to back her up no matter what came. I sat near the front with Emily and Mason. My son kept his hoodie up, his game controller stuffed in his pocket like a talisman. He hadn't streamed since that night. Every time he tried, his laughter caught in his throat, replaced by quick glances at the door, like he was waiting for Karen to appear again. At the head of the table, Karen sat with her signature binder, the HOA's, bylaws neatly tabbed and color-coded. She tapped a pen against the table, lips pursed in that familiar line of disapproval. When the last chair squeaked into place, she cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we need to discuss repeated noise violations coming from the Hassan household." Her eyes flicked toward me like daggers. "This has been a long-standing problem, and as your HOA president, I can't allow one family to destroy the peace we've all worked so hard to maintain." A few of her allies nodded along, but this time, something was different. I saw more frowns than agreement. A couple of neighbors whispered behind their hands, glancing at me with sympathy. I stood up slowly. "Before we get into accusations, I think everyone deserves to see what actually happened last Friday night." Karen's head snapped toward me. "Excuse me? This is my meeting, Daniel. You'll speak when I recognize you." "Then recognize me," I said, my voice calm but firm. My palms were sweaty, my heart pounding, but I wasn't backing down. The younger officer from that night was there too, standing near the back wall. He gave me a nod, almost like permission. I placed my laptop on the table, turned it toward the board, and pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Mason's laughter. Then the audio shifted, the deafening bang on the door, the screech of hinges, Karen's voice slicing through the air. "This is a violation of HOA rules. If you won't control your kid, I will." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the back clutched her chest. The video rolled on, showing Karen's two biker companions, one of them idly tapping his bat against his leg while Mason's voice broke in fear. Karen's face went pale. This is taken out of context," she stammered. "He was screaming. I heard him. I thought he was in danger." I hit pause. "Karen, the 911 records show your call came in at 9:07 p.m. You told the police my son was being abused, but as you can all hear, and as everyone online already saw, at 9:07, my son was laughing, talking to his friend on a video game. He wasn't in danger. He wasn't being hurt. You lied." I zoomed in on the chat replay. Dozens of usernames filled the screen. "I'm screen recording this," one said. "Karen's crazy," said another. "These are all witnesses. Strangers, hundreds of them. People who saw you break into my home and try to paint me as a criminal." Karen's mouth twisted. She clutched her binder like a lifeline. "The HOA gives me the authority?" "No," I cut her off. My voice carried, calm but sharp. "The HOA does not give you the right to enter my house without permission. It does not give you the right to bring strangers onto my property in the middle of the night. And it definitely doesn't give you the right to weaponize law enforcement against my family with false claims. That's trespassing. That's harassment. That's reckless endangerment." For a moment, the only sound in the room was Mason's voice still echoing faintly from the recording. "Dad, I wasn't being loud." Mrs. Caldwell, the board member I had spoken to earlier, cleared her throat. "Karen," she said carefully, "we've all had complaints from you, but this is too far. You endangered a child, and you lied to the police." Another neighbor stood. "You fined me for my recycling bin being crooked. Meanwhile, your friend has a rusted trampoline in her yard. Why does she get a pass?" More voices joined in. "You threatened to tow my car. You said my kid's sidewalk chalk was graffiti. You've been spying on us at night." The tide had turned. Karen looked around the room, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her authority, her control, was slipping through her fingers. "Everyone calm down," she shrieked, pounding her pen against the table. "I am the president of this HOA. You signed the rules. I have the power to enforce them." "No," I said again, this time louder, stronger. I turned my laptop toward the entire room so everyone could see her storming into my home, her voice raised, the biker thugs looming. "You abused that power. You crossed a line. And now the police have this video too. They know the truth." All eyes swung to the younger officer in the back. He spoke carefully. "The department has reviewed the footage. It directly contradicts the call we received. As of this week, miss, Karen is under investigation for filing a false police report and trespassing." Karen's face drained of color completely. Her pen clattered to the table. You can't do this to me," she whispered. "I've done everything for this neighborhood." "No," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "You did everything for yourself. And tonight, were voting. Enough is enough. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't drawn out. A simple show of hands one by one, neighbors raising their arms until it was nearly unanimous. Out of 20 households, 18 voted to remove her from her position. The 2 who didn't, her biker friends who looked like they wanted nothing more than to vanish into the floor. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For once, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA had no words. She grabbed her binder, stuffed her phone into her purse, and stormed out of the community center. The sound of the door slamming shut was the sweetest thing I'd heard in months. As the tension in the room broke, neighbors began clapping. Some patted me on the back. Mrs. Delgado hugged Emily. Even the officer cracked a small smile before he followed Karen outside. But I barely heard them. I was looking at Mason, who had pulled his hood back. He was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since this nightmare began. And in that moment, I knew the war was over. Karen had played her hand, and this time, she lost. When Karen stormed out of that HOA meeting, binder clutched to her chest like it was a shield, I thought I'd feel nothing but triumph. And for a moment, I did. The sound of the door slamming behind her was a kind of music, the final note in a song we'd been forced to hear for too long. But what came next was quieter, slower, and in many ways, far more powerful. For the first time in months, our house felt like a home again. That night, Mason asked if he could leave his bedroom door open while he played. It might sound like nothing, but to me, it meant everything. He wasn't afraid anymore. His friends had flooded his chat with support after seeing Karen's outburst. They called him brave. They told him he had the coolest dad in the world. And when he laughed that night, a full belly-shaking laugh, I realized just how heavy the silence had become in our house. The next morning, something even more surprising happened. Neighbors started showing up. First, it was Mrs. Delgado, holding a tray of fresh muffins. "For Mason," she said, her voice softer than usual, "tell him we all love hearing him laugh. It makes the street feel alive." Then came the Millers, baby in tow. "If Karen ever bothers you again, call us," Mr. Miller said. "I'll come over. She's been riding everyone here for years, but you stood up to her. You made it stop." By noon, there was a small crowd outside. People I had only waved at before were introducing themselves, shaking my hand, telling me they'd seen the live stream. Apparently, it had gone viral. Some gaming news outlet even picked it up, running the headline, "HOA President Caught Crashing 11-Year-Old's Gaming Stream. Community in Shock." Karen had always relied on silence. She relied on shame, on the fact that nobody wanted to be the problem neighbor. But the video changed everything. Her threats weren't whispered rumors anymore. They were broadcast evidence. By the end of that week, the board had voted her out as president. The 2 biker bodyguards disappeared. Rumor had it they weren't neighbors at all, but friends of her nephew. And the police followed up on the report she'd filed. Filing a false police report, especially one accusing a father of abusing his child, isn't something the law takes lightly. She was fined, forced to step down, and for the first time, her power was gone. But the real victory wasn't in watching Karen crumble. It was in seeing the community start to heal. The weekend after the vote, I walked outside to find Mr. Peterson mowing his lawn with his grandkids running around, their laughter echoing just like Mason's. Nobody cared. Nobody was worried about Karen's clipboard anymore. Someone dragged out speakers and played music from their driveway. Kids drew chalk hopscotch boards on the sidewalk. The whole neighborhood started breathing again. Emily and I decided to do something symbolic. We bought a young oak tree and planted it in the front yard, right next to Mason's navy blue mailbox. This time, Mason got to pick the spot. He pressed the soil around the roots with his small hands, looking up at me with that mischievous grin that had been missing for too long. "Do you think Karen's watching from her window?" he asked. I laughed. "Probably. Let her. This is our home." The neighbors clapped when we were done, a circle of families around us, all united by one thing. We were no longer afraid. The HOA even voted in Mrs. Caldwell as the new president. And the first thing she did was tear out half the ridiculous bylaws Karen had been using to torment people. Mailbox colors were no longer restricted. Kids could play basketball in their driveways. For the first time, the rules actually felt like they were serving the neighborhood, not enslaving it. As for Mason, He started streaming again. The first time he went live after the ordeal, I sat in the kitchen listening to his laughter echo through the house. My heart didn't seize with fear this time. Instead, I smiled. That sound, my son being a kid, unapologetically, was the exact reason I fought back. I didn't want him to grow up thinking that bullies win just because they're louder, older, or sitting behind a title. I wanted him to know that truth matters, that when someone crosses a line, you don't just endure it. You stand your ground, you gather your proof, and you fight back the right way. The viral video ended up being more than evidence for the police. It was a lifeline for us, and a wake-up call for the neighborhood. People who had felt powerless finally realized they weren't alone. That's the thing about bullies like Karen. Once the mask slips, once everyone sees them for who they really are, their power disappears. Looking back now, I can still see Mason's relief, the way he ran through the yard under the branches of our new oak tree, laughing with his friends. Our home feels alive again. And though part of me wishes this whole ordeal had never happened, another part of me is grateful, because it reminded me that standing up for your family isn't just about locking doors at night. It's about making sure no one can ever silence the joy inside your home. Karen thought she could barge into our lives and control us. Instead, she exposed herself. She lost her power, her position, and her grip on the neighborhood. And we got our peace back. So, here's my advice. Never let someone bully you into silence. If you're dealing with an HOA tyrant, document everything. Gather your proof. Stand together with your neighbors. Because when you shine a light on the truth, their power crumbles. And if you've ever had an HOA abuse power, subscribe now and share your story in the comments. I'll be reading them. And maybe, just maybe, your story will be the next one I tell.